Continuing our discussion on complex carbohydrates, I'll just get right into it. So the next section in the chapter goes over modified starches for a little bit. And so modified starches are any starches that have been changed structurally by some kind of chemical means. The chemical means might be an acid that they added, enzymes that they used, but the chemical structure of the starch has been changed. And like with that, there's usually a hydrolysis process to do that. Um, there are many things that can be changed in this for these modifications. So sweetness, so generally starches aren't considered sweet, but they could modify the molecule to make it taste a little bit more sweet. Changing up the particle size, the viscosity, whether you want it to be thinner or more viscous. It, depending on what product that you're going to be using it for. The mouth feel. So if you want something that feels more smooth in the mouth, for example, than the normal starch that you would use, then you can change the structure a little bit to achieve that. Appearance of the starch. Um, Now, a special type of modified starch that the book talks about is cross-linked starch. And so for this type of starch, the starch has been changed chemically so that the starch is actually cross-linked between starch molecules. And the reason that they would do that is we've talked before about how starches and gelation properties can be affected by acids, right? Or, and we'll get into it, I think, a little bit later in this chapter. Like if you go past a certain heat point, and we did talk about it a little bit last week, you start to lose some of the gelation properties, right? So this type of modified starch is resistant to that. So you can add the acids, you can heat to a higher temperature or heat longer, and it not adversely affect the food product. This special starch also improves retrogradation so that the gelation properties, syneresis, so that you can store it without water leaching out, or just during the retrogradation process, the molecules being squeezed so tightly that water is squeezed out, and the freeze thaw stability. So that it maintains its structure even when it is frozen and then thawed. Um, so here I just wanted to show some examples of products that you have modified starches in them. And some of them are more obvious than others. So like Cool Whip and whipped cream cheese. The reason that the starch would be added there is for stability. Like you don't have starch in regular cream cheese, for example, but the starch does help maintain some of the structural stability of these whipped items, keeping them nice and light and airy, and not collapsing. So Fruit Loops have modified food starch in them. Some fries can use modified food starch. It's used as a coating, and it helps retain the texture and the structure of the fries during cooking. And so it gives you a more crispy exterior on the fries and less oil absorption, so the fries aren't as oily tasting. Here we have, so these are like special low carb tortillas and English muffins. And So how they make low carb breads is that they use a modified starch that is a special kind of starch called resistant starch. And its modification makes it harder to digest. And so it actually ends up acting like fiber in the gut. Um, and resistant starch, it can naturally be found in some foods, such as green bananas, plantains, beans, peas, lentils, to some extent in whole grains, and it's also can be found in cooked and cooled rice. Um, but they've researched those properties in the real foods and then modified the starch that is, they use wheat starch in these. Um, so they've modified a wheat starch to mimic the chemical structure of the resistant starch that they find in some of these fruits and vegetables and legumes. And so that's how you get tortillas and things that are low carb. Um, then Nutri-Grain bars. Probably the starch in this is probably most likely in the filling of it, help with the gelation properties of that filling. Then frozen dinners. So having a modified starch will help with that freeze thaw stability, so that the sauce that is on this pot roast doesn't just kind of come apart when it's thawing and kind of become like a clumpy, soupy mess. Um, and then there's also modified food starch in lots of your yogurt. And that's just going to also help with its thickening stability in the yogurt. So how do we thicken sauces with starch? Thinking mostly about home cooking, but it also applies at a commercial level. They would do this at a bigger scale. So the key thing with starch is that you cannot add dry starch directly to a large amount of liquid because it's going to form lumps that are really hard, really difficult to get rid of. And so what happens if you do that is, so this little drawing here, you throw raw starch into some liquid, and there's going to be clumps of the raw starch. You aren't throwing, when you put it all in all at once, the starch molecules, starch granules are going to clump up together. They aren't going to disperse themselves. And so they're going to be clumped. And then as the temperature increases, so this is like, especially if you are adding starch to already hot water, this is going to happen really fast. The starch granules that are on the exterior of this clump are going to swell, and they're going to form a gel. And it will be very difficult for the water to get through that gel to reach the dry granules that are on the inside of this clump. Okay, so now you have this gelled clump, and that's why it's really hard to get rid of clumps of starch if you have made this mistake of adding it directly to especially hot liquid. Okay. Now, conversely, if you do something to separate that starch before you add it to the liquid, you'll get nice separation also in the cooked product, and all of the starch will be able to participate in forming a gel. So not only do you get lumpy gravy or whatever if you just directly add the starch to your big pot of liquid, but you also will have less gelation occurring overall because these are trapped. They are stuck together. The granules that are on the outside of this clump. They're stuck together, so they're not dispersing into the liquid. And then the ones on the inside, of course, are completely non-functional and not contributing to gelation at all. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so next we'll go through 3 different methods to achieve this down here with the starch being separated. The most common at-home method that you've probably used if you've helped cook at home, or you've seen your mom use, is the cold water paste method. A lot of recipes will actually call this a slurry, which to me is usually more what it looks like as a slurry. Not using the same slurry term as what we talked about last week necessarily, but it's usually more liquid than, at least when I'm mixing mine, than pasty. But essentially, you mix you mix your starch in a small amount of cold liquid. You don't want it to be hot because you'll get this going on. If you mix it into hot, you'll get, some immediate gelation. So you mix it into cold liquid, and just doing it in a small amount of liquid allows you to disperse those starch granules much more easily than if it were in a bigger amount of liquid. And so you mix that well until it is finely dispersed, and then you can pour it into your soup or gravy or sauce or whatever it is that you are making. And you can pour that in hot, or into the hot liquid too, without ill effects. The next method of separating out your starch granules before adding them into your sauce is using starch and fat. And so with that, you have equal amounts of starch and heated fat are mixed, and then you pour that into your gravy or sauce, or you add the extra liquid for your gravy or sauce. So there are two very common, the two most common ways to do this. The first one is a beurre manière. And this is a paste that is made from butter and flour. It can be nicely formed into a ball, but it doesn't have to be. You can just mix it up in a bowl. And so you are finally dispersing that flour into the butter before you add it into your sauce. The nice thing about this beurre manière is that you can form it into a little ball. So because the butter is hard at refrigeration temperatures, you can pre-make these little balls of beurre manière and store them for use later. Another common method of doing this starch and fat mixture is a roux. And so with that, you mix equal amounts of whatever fat, oil you're going to use, and flour, and you're actually cooking it as you're mixing it. And you can do that to varying degrees of doneness. How dark you make that roux determines flavor. So if you're making a white gravy, you probably will stop right here. If you're making a darker gravy, you're going to let it go darker. And the darkness has an impact on flavor. Or the same things that affect the darkness have an impact on flavor. So this browning of the flour also lends a certain flavor to whatever sauce or soup or whatever it is that you're making. The third method of separating out your starch granules is using sugar. And so with this method, you simply mix your cornstarch or whatever starch you're using with the sugar that is in your mixture first. And so it's just mixing your dry ingredients and dispersing them well. And that sugar helps separate those starch granules and also keep them from coming back together and sticking together. And so you mix that sugar and starch and then add your liquid or add it to the liquid. And so all of those methods, the overall goal is to separate out the individual starch granules so you don't have big clumps of them when you add to the liquid. Okay, and then so now a note about extended heating and or stirring. So extended heating reduces thickening. You've already seen this graph that I showed last week. So as the temperature rises, you get maximum gelation. But as the temperature continues to rise, you will lose some of that gelation ability. And then if it rises even further, you gain some of it back, but it's still not close to what the maximum gelation is. So understanding those temperatures and that once you get to a certain temperature, you need to pull your sauce gravy off of the heat is important so that you don't end up thinning it out again because it's too hot. Also, continued stirring can also be an issue, and it's just because you are potentially dispersing some of those starch molecules that are causing that gelation after you've thickened it. And so that you can like physically break those hydrogen bonds that are holding those starch molecules together and causing the gelation. If you physically break them, then they're not able to hold as much water anymore in between them. So there's not that swelling and it will thin out. Okay, so now getting into nutrition again. A lot of this is a little bit of a repeat because we talked about nutrition with sugars in the last chapter, and complex carbohydrates are also sugars as far as how the body processes them, because your body breaks down the complex carbohydrates down all the way down to glucose and then uses it the same way. But we will add a little bit more info onto what we learned for chapter 8. Okay, so we can divide the complex carbohydrates into digestible and non-digestible carbohydrates. And so the digestible complex carbohydrates are starches, and just like sugars, because it's going to break down to glucose, these are 4 calories per gram as far as energy that they provide us. Then the non-digestible complex carbohydrates are fiber. And these are not, even though like you could put it into a furnace and get 4 calories per gram out of it, our bodies are not going to get that energy because our bodies can't digest it. And so they're considered to have no calories. Okay. So the traditional guidance, the guidance from FDA, is that about approximately 50% of calories should come from carbohydrates. I've already kind of expressed that some people would say that that number is a little bit too high. The book Once again, the book states that the brain can only use glucose for energy. So I have a little asterisk here because that is incorrect. The brain can also use ketones effectively, and you get ketones if you have a very, very low carbohydrate diet. Otherwise, if the brain could only use glucose for energy, a lot of people would be dead, because not just those who are on ketogenic diets, but also anyone who is fasting, who is undergoing any kind of prolonged starvation, or just in a period where you can't eat a lot of carbohydrates. You'd be dead if the brain could not use alternate sources of energy. So just incorrect statement in the book. Okay, so glycogen storage. This is kind of a little bit of review, but we'll delve into it a little bit more. So 1/3 of the glycogen storage is in the liver. So let's back up. So complex carbohydrates are going to be broken down to glucose. I've already said that a couple times. Okay, and then glucose is going to be stored as glycogen. And glycogen is stored, approximately 1/3 of it is stored in the liver, and 2/3 in the muscle. Okay. And the book talks a little bit about exercise and glycogen, so we'll delve into that a little bit. So muscle glycogen can be completely used up in less than 2 hours of intense exercise. There all are alternate ways to fuel the muscle, and it depends a little bit on how much training your muscles have gone into, and what type of muscle fibers that you have. And you can change your muscle fiber type depending on the training that you go to. So like sprinters have a very glycogen dependent muscle type, but long distance runners have a muscle. They develop a muscle type that is more it's called red muscle type and red muscle fibers, and it is less dependent on glycogen, and it has other ways to produce energy using oxygen. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that too much, but anyways, your glycogen stores can be used up in less than 2 hours of an intense exercise. Intense means like running hard. Okay. Now you can build up those glycogen stores with training and a high carbohydrate diet. So some methods of doing that. You can have, like I did some little bit of research into this. Okay, so you can, some methods of doing this. You do 3 days of hard training, actually consuming a low carbohydrate diet, followed by 3 days of tapered training where you're reducing the amount of exercise to where just before your big event, you don't exercise like the day before, but you are on a high carbohydrate diet while you're tapering that down. So you have 3 days of hard training with a low carb diet. You are like completely depleting your glycogen, and then you rest more and eat a very high carbohydrate diet. This training is very difficult, both physically and psychologically, when you're in the low carb phase. But it has been shown to really build up that glycogen reserve above normal levels. And then when you are in your meet or whatever your event is, you have greater stores and can last a little bit longer without the glycogen stores being depleted. And so you end up with a little bit more energy than normal. So this little graph here is showing that. So if you look at the days here, this person is doing basically 2-a-days. Okay, so like they train at the beginning of day 1. Well, here they're not. So here, this is just, I guess, regular training. So day 1, train. During the training, they deplete their glycogen, but not to the point where they have contractile dysfunction, which would be like your muscles stop working as well because they've been completely depleted of glycogen. Then they eat, rest, build up those glycogen stores again, but not all the way up to what they were before. So this is not a very high carbohydrate diet. Then they train on day 2 and get it just to the point where their muscles are not working quite as well. And then eat. Again, they are not getting their glycogen stores as high as when they started. So they are consuming relatively low carbs. Then here they start 2-a-day training sessions. So they are really depleting things, okay? And so this is a hard workout where at the end your muscles are like dead, okay? So they're doing these 2-a-days, still low carb. And then starting here on day 4, they have very light training here. Okay, notice it doesn't dip below the threshold, and then they consume a lot of carbs. And then day 5, very small amount of training here, where it barely depleted what they'd already gained, and they're still consuming high carbohydrate. And so by the end of it, they are rested, fed, and super compensated with their glycogen levels. Okay. Some other ways they could do this. They can do this without the low carb part, and it actually also works, and doesn't kill you quite as bad. And instead, they just do the 3 days of tapered training, where by the end they're not really not doing anything strenuous, with at least, and they give themselves 24 hours of rest prior to competition, and just doing high carbohydrate just before competition. Another interesting thing to know is that consuming protein, higher levels of protein, can also increase glycogen synthesis. So if you're an athlete, you can use some of this knowledge to help you with training. Okay. And then just like before, key thing is excess carbohydrates in the diet get turned into fat. So if there's not enough room for it to be stored as glycogen, it becomes fat. Okay. So, okay, this is where I'm gonna like delve off into my keto stuff, but it's because the book starts telling us things that are incorrect, and I can't let that pass. So using fat for energy. The book says you shouldn't do it. Okay, so in a traditional diet where you are having 50% of your calories as carbohydrates, those carbohydrates are used to convert fat to energy. Okay, so fat can be converted to energy, but the carbohydrates are actually used to help do it. Okay, but if you are under a very low carbohydrate diet, such as the keto diet, you will go into ketosis, which is the process of burning fat without carbohydrates. Okay, so the byproduct of this ketosis is several chemicals called ketone bodies, and these can be used by the body as an alternate energy source to glucose. It actually is a great energy source compared to glucose, because per ketone body you get more ATP, more energy that your body uses out of the ketone body. Okay. Healthy people do not produce ketone bodies at a dangerous level. Okay, the book here is kind of has some scare tactics, like you could kill your kidneys and stuff. And the key thing, healthy people do not produce ketone bodies at a dangerous level. Okay, so let's talk about the kidneys. Now, a ketogenic diet does carry an increased risk of kidney stones. There's several reasons, potential reasons for that. One is it's easy to get dehydrated on a ketone diet because your body does not store water as well or as much as a traditional diet. And how your body stores water is because of carbohydrates have all of those water and molecules inside them. Like so. Anyways, also with higher protein, there's potentially more uric acid, which can cause kidney stones. There are things that you can do to reduce this, and in fact, there's been some research that most of the kidney stone there's some that think that most of the kidney stone deaths are actually children that are on keto diets, and children get put on keto diets for completely different reasons than adults. And so there's often other medications involved that can contribute to that risk of kidney stones. But so I will admit that a low carbohydrate diet can increase the risk of kidney stones. You can also decrease that risk by drinking a lot more water. So, but as far as the ketone bodies do increase the acidity of the blood, but it's still within a normal range. It's not within a harmful range if you are healthy. Okay. Now, when the book is talking about the super acid state that can be really harmful, that can happen in type 1 diabetics, which is a completely different issue than just having a low carbohydrate diet. Okay. So type 1 diabetics, if they don't have enough insulin to process blood sugar, then they can go into diabetic ketoacidosis, which is like a very severe thing that like they'll be hospitalized for. Okay. And can cause major issues. But this is not people that are normal healthy people. Now it also talks about pregnancy. So pregnancy increases the risk. So again, being pregnant and just eating a low carbohydrate diet is not going to cause this. It is pregnancy along with typically type 1 diabetes. Sometimes gestational diabetes can kind of cause this, but really it's mostly just type 1 diabetics that are in danger of having this ketoacidosis problem. So the key thing is that the danger of ketone bodies are if you're diabetic, and it actually does not really have anything to do with a normal low carbohydrate diet. It's not the same thing as ketosis from a low carbohydrate diet at all. So the book is making a low carbohydrate diet sound very dangerous, and it's definitely not as dangerous as the book is what is stating. So I'm trying to temper, like, I'm not really trying to push like my diet on y'all, but I don't want the disinformation from the book, or misinformation. And part of it may be that this book is older. It's 15 years old, and there's been more things that have come out about nutrition since then. So I'll also point out, like, so kidneys, so there's some people that think that low carbohydrate diet would be bad if you have kidney disease, but there's actually also a lot of research that shows that a properly managed low carb diet can be good for people with chronic kidney disease. So yeah, it's weighing the research with that. Okay. So now fiber, bran, and bulk. So now let's talk about indigestible carbohydrates. That's basically what this slide is. So we have two main types of fiber. Okay, the first is cellulose, and cellulose is all what we call insoluble fiber, which means it does not dissolve in water. So benefits of insoluble fiber, it provides bulk, so it just helps you feel full without actually consuming a lot of calories. It aids in digestion by preventing constipation and improving bowel movements or the elimination of waste, however you want to phrase that. And so how this works, it actually attracts water into your stool, making it softer and easier to pass. So cellulose can be found in whole wheat flour, wheat bran, nuts, beans, vegetables such as cauliflower, green beans, potato skins, lots of other vegetables. Now, the second type of fiber includes pectins, gums, and that resistant starch that I talked about earlier in this lecture. Okay. So these all form soluble fiber. It would almost be better if I had changed these titles to be like insoluble fiber includes cellulose, insoluble fiber includes pectins, gums, and resistant starch. But so soluble fiber, meaning that it will dissolve in water. Now it is still not digestible. Okay, it will dissolve in water, but our body still cannot process it and digest it. Okay. As it dissolves, it creates a gel. So think about our pectins and our gums, right? They gel up. They're firm. Gonna do the same thing in your body. And it's sorry. And it actually is a good thing. It also helps with moving things through your gut. Another good thing about soluble fiber, it has been shown to help reduce blood cholesterol as well as improve blood glucose control. So you're not getting big dips and peaks in your blood glucose, which is how diabetes works, is having big up and downs in your blood glucose is not good for your body. So soluble fiber sources can include oats, peas, beans, apples. Obviously, like are things that have pectin, right? So our apples are citrus. Bananas, the less ripe, the better. Avocados, carrots. All of these are good soluble fiber sources. Now, a lot of fiber sources have both types. In fact, most of them probably do, but just in varying amounts. Some of them have more insoluble fiber, some of them have more soluble fiber. Okay, and so last slide, we have a short lecture this week, and it's just because last week had to be longer because a stopping point in the book. But so best carbohydrate sources. So as far as my recommendations, is get your carbohydrates from what we call whole foods. So whole foods are like fruits and vegetables and things that have not been like completely processed, ground up, some things removed from them, and then put into your food. So using whole grains versus refined grains. Uh, by using whole grains, you are including all of the fiber portion of those grains. Our refined grains, most of the fiber has been taken out. So you think about white flour, most of the fiber has been taken out of the grain that flour originally came from the wheat grain. Limit your added sugar, and eat plenty of fiber containing foods because fiber is good for you in multiple ways. So key thing, these whole foods, whole foods are going to provide much more nutrients other than carbohydrates. So including your, essential vitamins and minerals that your body needs. They're also more likely to contain plenty of fiber in addition to the digestible carbohydrates. So that's the overall nutrition recommendation that I think we can all agree on there. So that is it for this week.